You must continue. Continue the story. Read more. Read more.
Just a quick thumbnail. How my facial expression should be. I walked up the avenue feeling excited but confident. Solid red brick houses on either side, probably built about 1910. Most of the people were in their front rooms. Some had the curtains across, heavy curtains with the light just showing through. In other houses, you could see in. Perhaps they like to be seen. Show how well off they are, so other people can envy them. Standard lamps, polished tables, chintz-covered furniture, subdued light, cozy glow from the fire. It was drizzling slightly, more like a mist really. I felt it cold against my cheeks, and my eyelashes were wet. I wondered if Jones would have his curtains across or not. It would be funny to see Jones at his own fireside in the bosom of his family. He'd never guess who was looking in at him. I wondered what he did in the evenings. Read? Talk? Probably both. He reads every line in the evening paper. The things about the child born with duck's feet in Arizona and the calf with 2 heads in Brazil. I thought I'd like to see Jones's daughter, the one who caught me at the garage door. Not that she actually caught me. It would be funny if she were pretty. I mean, with Jones as her father. But Jones cheated me. The curtains were across, and I couldn't see a thing. Worse still, the lights were on in the garage, and the door was closed. Jones must be in there, working, footering about, more likely. If he stayed there long, I'd just have to turn round and go home again. At first, I didn't know how to shift him. Then I thought of a ruse. I remembered a telephone box on the main road near the bus stop. I was now about 50 yards past Jones's house. I'd keep on walking in case of someone coming out and seeing a suspicious figure, palely loitering. But in fact, the avenue was quite deserted. Extraordinary how quiet the suburbs can be at times. You could cut someone's throat in the middle of the road, and no one would notice. If he yelled, they'd just think it was cats. I walked down the avenue again very quickly. Time was getting on. I'd have liked to run, but you couldn't tell. Someone peering from an upstairs window might see me under a street lamp. A man with a bag, running. A suspicious character. Phone the police! As I reached the main road, a bus went by quite empty. Even the conductor was sitting down reading the paper. The phone box was empty too. Every house has its own phone. If you economize by doing without a phone, you'd economize by living somewhere else. I had begun to feel the weight of the bag. I was quite glad to put it down for a bit inside the phone box. "All right, children," I said soothingly. "You'll get out soon now." I decided to leave the bag open while I telephoned, in case the rats were too hot and needed air. There they all were, good as gold. They hardly even moved when the light shone in on them. But I saw Socrates looking up at me, just waiting to be told what to do. Bless his little heart. I know Jones's number in my head. I've had to get it for him sometimes in the office. When the operator is out for her lunch or off sick or something. Of course, Jones is too important now ever to get a number for himself. I dialed, heard it begin to ring, and before anyone could answer, put in my 4 pennies. The moment the receiver was lifted, I pressed button A. I held my nose so that when I spoke, I'd have an American accent. A woman answered, "Hello," rather snooty. His good lady, as he calls her. "Hello there," I said. I waited a moment and Mrs. Jones said hello again. Not so snooty this time. My nasal voice had made her interested. I went on, "Hello there. That you, Liverpool? New York here." I stopped again. Someone told me once that all the New York calls came through Liverpool. I don't know why. Mrs. Jones was really interested by this time. "Hello, hello, hello?" I didn't want her to hang up yet. "Just a minute. Philadelphia. I'm talking to Liverpool here. Liverpool, England. Can you hear me, Liverpool?" "I can hear you very well," Mrs. Jones replied. "But I'm afraid it's not Liverpool." "Well, sorry, ma'am. I'm trying to get Liverpool to get me a Mr. Jones. But they've gotten hung up or something. Not good enough to convince an American, perhaps. But Mrs. Jones and I have probably the same idea of an American accent. Why anyhow should she have been suspicious?" She wasn't. She's proud and British. It's not every day she gets a call from New York. "This is the Jones residence." I hung up. I knew she'd have Jones in it 2 ticks. A call from New York coming through. He'd hang about waiting for it. He'd be tickled to death. He once did have a real call from New York, and he didn't stop blowing about it for ages. I closed the bag, picked it up, and hurried back. All the houses just the same, not a soul about. Nothing changed. Yes, there was, though Jones's garage doors were open. the light streaming out. I looked up at my watch. 9:15. No time to waste. But Jones might still be there on the other side of the car, bending over it, or crouched down doing something to one of the wheels. I'd have to chance it. I opened the gate. This time it squeaked like Evermore. What if Jones heard and came popping out of the garage to see who was there? There was so much light he'd be bound to recognize me. Even if he didn't, and I turned and bolted, I didn't stand a chance carrying that bag. He'd think it was the marauder again and come tearing after me, yelling his head off to attract the neighbors. I'd have to face it out, think up some sort of excuse. "Oh, hello, Mr. Jones. Very mild, isn't it, for the time of year? I was looking for some people called McElhenney, friends of ours. This bag belongs to them, and Mother insisted on me coming over to return it. A bit awkward if there were McElhenneys next door, but it wasn't likely. There aren't an awful lot of McElhenneys about. Anyhow, they could have turned out to be the wrong McElhenneys. I'd have said I was looking for the Theophilus, 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 McElhenneys. I'm sure they take a bit of finding, but Jones didn't appear. I got off the crunchy gravel and approached the garage door stealthily. I put down the bag. I got right down flat on the ground and peered into the garage. No feet, no legs showing on the far side of the car. All clear, in fact. He must have gone to the phone. I picked up the bag and walked boldly in. I opened the bag and took out the rats. "Tear it up! Tear it up!" 2 rats to each tire. "Tear it up! Tear it up!" I kept Socrates with me. Whatever happened, I didn't want him hurt. I looked at my watch again. 10:10. I'd been quicker than I thought. All action, of course. I went out again and hid behind a bush in the garden where I could see the front door, and at the same time get clear away to the gate if I had to run for it. I watched and waited, stroking Socrates and whispering to him to pass the time. He's a bad, cruel man, Socrates. He deserves everything that happens to him. He wouldn't let us have enough to eat if he had his way. He only pays starvation wages. And look at the way he lives himself. Doesn't skimp when it comes to looking after Mr. Jones, as you can see for yourself. 5:10. I thought it would have been more. Was Jones still hanging about the phone? Perhaps he was reading the paper to put in the time. But how long would he wait before he decided to go back to the garage and finish whatever he was doing? Or else close up for the night? "Dear me," he'd say to Mrs. Jones any minute now. "That call's a long time. I've left the garage open and the light on. I think I'll just pop out and lock up. Give me a shout if they come through again." "Yes, certainly, dear," Mrs. Jones would say, and out he'd come all fuss. 10:00. Surely the rats should be nearly finished by now. Of course, rubber's tough, and there are only 2 of them to each tire. I never timed them before. I suppose I should have. I'd have been better to do only 1 tire. It would have been quite enough to impress Jones. I could have let them go at it in shifts. All the same four tires' ruin will impress him even more. 10:05. I could hear it no longer. I went in to see how they were getting on. Air hissing. They'd done it. I should have realized they'd go on gnawing till I told them to stop. Puncture or no puncture. I checked quickly. One tire flat, one almost flat, one just through and doing most of the hissing, one not quite through. I pulled out my pocket knife and administered the coup de grace to that one myself. We'd been too long already. And then I heard a door close. I never heard it open. Jones's step on the gravel. In another second, he'd be in on top of me. And no amount of McElhenney's could explain this away. I noticed a small door at the back of the garage. Perhaps we were saved. "Stop!" I whispered desperately to the rats. "Here!" They came. But what slow movers they are. Even at full speed, rats are slow. I almost threw them into the bag. Socrates was there already, all in. I closed the bag, nipped through the small door, and found myself in Jones's backyard. Dark. I felt about, tripped over the bin, discovered another door, opened it, and emerged into the garden. I tiptoed round the back of the garage. What was Jones doing? Ah! The open gate had caught his eye, and annoyed him, no doubt. Careful householder that he is. He had closed it and was now approaching the front door of the garage. Would he close that also and go away without noticing his ripped tires? I froze. He closed one half. The light was still on. He had to step inside to switch it off. What the hell? He noticed. What next? For a long time he did nothing. His footsteps had stopped. He must have been just staring into the garage, wondering what had happened to his car. It looks odd, doesn't it, Mr. Jones? Sort of sunk down. Ah, a step. He'd gone in a little, not very far. Some maniac had slashed his tires. The maniac might still be lurking near, ready to jump out and rip up Jones as well as his tires. Jones was frightened. So was I. If I made the slightest movement, Jones would hear me and shout for help. I had cramp in one foot, but I didn't dare more than flex my toes. Another step. Jones had gathered up a little courage. No, he hadn't. He was coming out of the garage, not going further in. I heard the gravel crunch again. He was going back to the house to ring the police. Now should be my chance. As soon as the front door was closed, I'd dash out and down to the bus stop. No one was going to worry about a respectable young man. Well, fairly young, and I look younger than my age, standing at the bus stop with a leather traveling bag in his hand, and once I was on to the bus, I'd be safe, whirled away into the city, able to get off wherever I liked. But the front door didn't shut. Still on tiptoe, I got to the side of the garage, where I could have a clear run to the gate. The light was streaming out from the hall across the little bit of lawn between the house and the road. Emily, dear, would you come and look at this, please? Wish he'd learned to speak like that in the office. Home is Emily's office. Look at what? Don't you know I'm busy? None of the sweet dignity with which she coos to transatlantic telephone operators. Dare I run for it? I might have got to the gate without being seen, but any moment he might have turned and caught sight of me. Then the chase would have been on. The click of the latch on the gate, the crunch of my foot on the gravel, anything might have attracted his attention. I couldn't run fast with the bag. Better wait a little. I want you to look at the tires on the car. They've been slashed. Slashed! How do you mean slashed? I mean slashed. Cut down the sides. Well, what good's it going to do? Me looking at them? You'd better phone the police. Jones pondered over this for a bit. Perhaps he couldn't really believe his tires had been slashed, afraid of calling the police, and finding that it had all been an illusion. Would you not phone them? He said. I'll stay here and watch. There may still be someone hanging about. That was enough for me. Now or never, I'd have to make a bolt for it. Maybe I could get through the hedge at the back and into the garden of a house in the next avenue. Jones's garden isn't big, but when I got to the back hedge, I couldn't hear any longer the conversation between Jones and his sweet Emily. This made me nervous, though I knew it wasn't possible yet. I felt that the police might be here any second. Perhaps Police HQ might already have radioed to one of their roaming patrol cars, which might just happen to be in the next avenue. At any moment would come a scream of sirens to alert the whole district. The hedge at the back wasn't very thick. I burst into it, not caring what harm I did. But there was barbed wire, just one strand, I think. The rest must have rusted away. My trousers caught. I stopped very deliberately, put down the bag in front of me, and unloosed myself. Wouldn't do to have torn pants. Not respectable. Attract attention immediately. More time gone. I felt increasingly frightened. I almost panicked. Free at last, in among trees and bushes, a bigger garden than Jones's classier. I stepped forward, cautiously, but caution wasn't much good. I was walking on broken branches and twigs. Yap, 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 yap. The full stop doesn't mean it did stop. It went on. One of these blasted little dogs, a Karen or something, C-A-R-N, Karen, all yap yap and furry, signifying that it knew jolly well I shouldn't be there and wanted to warn the neighborhood. I peered out through rhododendrons, Rhododendrons. I saw a big square, detached house. There was a broad lawn on one side, and the gate onto the road was clearly in view. I couldn't see what was on the other side. Probably a yard and garage with more dustbins to trip over. The dog was on the back lawn, about 6 feet away. He was afraid to come into the shrubbery because of the awful monster lurking there. I tried to think what to do. I could either dash straight across the lawn to the gate and get clear, with the chance that someone might open the front door just as I was passing and see me, or I could creep around the other side and perhaps come against something I didn't expect. In either case, I'd have the dog yapping at my heels. Perhaps a good kick would quiet him. On the other hand, he might nip me. I didn't want that. I had to make up my mind pretty quickly. If the police came, they'd hear the dog yapping and find me straight away. I decided on the quick dash. 1, 2, a door opened in the side of the house. Light shone out across the lawn. Woofles! Woofles! Don't be nasty to the hedgehogs. So I was a hedgehog, was I? Better behave like one and stay in the rhododendrons. Rhododendrons. With my bristles up. Naughty Woofles! Woofles, come to mother. Yap, 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 yap. Woofles, dear, come to mother. Dear little hedgehogs never harm anybody, only eat up nasty slugs and snails. Yap, 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 yap. Woofles! Mother gave up. The door closed. I allowed a few seconds to make sure she wouldn't change her mind. Now for it, I thought. I ran across the lawn with the bag in my hand, Woofles yapping and snapping all the way. I reached the gate and got out. I shut the gate in Woofles' face, but Woofles has a hole in the hedge just beside the gate and was out almost before I'd time to turn round. I was puffed. I couldn't run any more. I began to walk slowly down the avenue towards the main road. The beastly dog was still with me. Woofles, go home! He paid no attention. He kept jumping at the bag, snapping at it rather than me. He must have smelt the rats. If the police came along in one of their big cars, they'd be sure to stop to investigate. I wonder, sir, would you mind opening your bag and let me see what's inside it? Not a question, a command. Perhaps he wouldn't even say sir. Probably they just put that in books to make everybody think how nice the police are. Yap, 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 and snap, 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 snap. Woofles was driving me mad. All right, I shouted suddenly. Get in if you want to. I put the bag down on the pavement and opened it, but Woofles didn't leap bravely in. Not a bit of him. He drew back a little and looked in, and barked more furiously than ever. I stood and watched. He got a little closer to the bag. You could hardly see the rats, all huddled in one corner, probably scared out of their wits. But all my better feelings had been lost. I made a dive and grabbed Woofles by the scruff of the neck. I showed him into the bag with the rats. Tear 'em up, I said. Let the best animal win. I was quite sure it wouldn't be Woofles. He wouldn't know what to do, shut up in the bag in the dark, with rats crawling over him. I walked on a few steps feeling pleased with myself. That's fixed, you little bastard, I told him. No more yappy yap from you. Then I began to feel sorry. Maybe Woofles wasn't such a bad little dog after all. He'd only been doing his duty. To be torn apart by rats would be a horrible death. What would I find when I opened the bag? A half-eaten dead dog? I put the bag down quickly. Not a sound from inside. I hoped Woofles was still all right. I opened the bag. Woofles jumped out and streaked off home. You never saw a small dog move faster, and not a yap left in him. But what about Socrates and the other rats? I peered in anxiously. All right. I stroked Socrates for a little. Apparently nobody attacked anybody. I closed the bag, walked quickly down the avenue, and caught a bus which arrived at exactly the right moment. As I took my seat, I saw a police car turning into Jones's Avenue. Neat enough, safe home, and no more trouble. Mother is dying. She knows. Indeed, I haven't made any attempt to hide it from her. She wouldn't wish me to. The doctor says she may last a week or 10 days, not more. The sooner the better. If we had sensible laws, the doctor would have chloroformed her last week as soon as he knew she couldn't recover. In this, we are kinder to our animals than ourselves. Watching a person die is tedious. It is also interesting. Mother would like to think that her life had been worthwhile. All she leaves behind her, the only tangible evidence of her struggle with the world, is me. And she is disappointed in me. I am not the sort of person I myself would have liked to be. Something has gone wrong somewhere, but Mother would like to pretend that it hasn't. She would like to arrive in heaven with a solid record of achievements in her hand, and material achievements at that. Look at my son down there, she'd like to be able to say. Built the business up to double what it was when his poor father died, and goes to church twice every Sunday as well. Not that his father didn't do very well, thanks to having a good wife to look after him and comfort him when he needed it. Of course, I do go to church twice every Sunday, but once she's dead, I won't go at all. I just go now to save argument. What Mother does say is this: well, dear, when I'm gone, you won't have me to look after you anymore. Pretty obvious. You'll have to look after yourself. Also pretty obvious. You'll have to look round and find a nice, sensible girl. It's nearly time you were beginning to think about getting married. But don't be in too much of a hurry. You might say if I didn't hurry, I'd be past it. Your father always used to say he'd never have got on without me. If it hadn't been for me, he didn't know where he'd have been. And you've always been a good boy. Never any trouble. You are a good boy, aren't you, dear? Yes, Mother. She's still wondering what I get up to when I go out at night, but she's afraid to ask. If there was a woman, I'm not sure that she'd mind, so long as she didn't know. She likes a man to be a man, as she told me once, rather surprisingly. Well, dear, I suppose I've had a good life. A good husband and a good son. I've a great deal to be thankful for. I say nothing. She knows she is being a lot of trouble, and is rather pathetic about it. Several times I've been late into the office, and nearly every day I have to prolong my lunch hour, without always being able to get time to eat anything myself. Not that Mother eats, but she needs things done for her. The district nurse does some of them, but not all. In spite of not eating, she keeps vomiting horrible brown stuff that I have to clear up. I don't know what to think about Jones. So far as I can hear, he hasn't mentioned the destruction of his tires to anyone. Perhaps the police have told him to say nothing, in the hope that the guilty person will give himself away. Don't they know the damage was done by rats? Or is that something so unlikely that it has never occurred to them? Mother seems to be worrying about what will happen to me after she's dead. I don't know why. She has said several times, I hope your uncle will do right by you in the end. And once she mumbled, I'm sure your uncle won't forget his own brother's son. She means my uncle in Canada, who's supposed to have all the money. He's the only uncle I've got. I keep watching Jones, and sometimes I fancy he is watching me. Does he wonder if it was I who slashed his tires? I like to think so, but of course I must give him no clue. That's what he's hoping for. It's a sort of duel between us, but he doesn't know that. He thinks I am in his power, that he can crush me at any time. Jones has been rather nasty about my being late and the time I have been taking for my lunch. Can you not get a nurse? He asked twice already. You can't go on like this or your work will be getting behind. I haven't let my work get behind, I tell him coldly. I've worked late each night till it's done. He goes off grumbling. She died at last. I thought she was never going to. She stuck it 3 days longer than the doctor thought possible. I must say now that it's over. I feel proud of her. She was a tough old bird. The funeral was this morning, the old-fashioned kind. She didn't want to be cremated, had to be buried with father. Gave me special instructions on various occasions over the last 15 years, every time she had a weak turn or even a bad cold in the head. There's something about a funeral. It gives you a sense of importance if you're the chief mourner, as I was. Not that I was really mourning a bit, but I liked everyone paying attention to me. I don't suppose I'll have another chance like it. The next funeral in the family will be my own, and there won't be many at it. Surprising how many were at Mother's, mostly from the church, but a few business people as well. Friends of Father's. I think old people like going to funerals. The fact they get back from the graveyard shows that they're still alive themselves. Jones was there. Very solicitous. Solicitous, solicitous, and quite different from the way he is with me in the office. I think I understand him. He was satisfying his sense of propriety. Father was head of the firm. Mother was Father's widow. By treating Mother's funeral as important, he was paying tribute to his own importance and dignity. That wasn't all. He'd like to buy our house. He grew up in business feeling that Father was someone tremendous, even if Father wasn't making a great job of things at the end. To Jones, he was like the king on his throne. Jones has always wanted to be in the same position. If he could get our house and live in it, he'd feel he really had arrived. He looks on it in a funny sort of way, as a usurper, U-S-U-R-P-E-R, usurper, might look on the royal palace. Well, he's not going to get this royal palace if I can help it. I didn't even let him in after the funeral. He seemed to think we'd all go in and hear a solicitor read Mother's will or something. But I didn't want to let him or anyone else into the house. For one thing, I'd nothing to give them. I wasn't going to run about making tea, and I couldn't afford drink. So I just let them all go home. All the same, I should have more money now. Mother must have spent some money on herself. In fact, I know she did. All that, even if it isn't very much, is bound to come to me. She hadn't anyone else to leave it to. I'll bring the rats into the house. I'll put them in the cellar to begin with. Except Socrates. I'll let Socrates go wherever he likes. It will be much handier than having to go up to the shed the whole time. I'll be able to do a lot more about their training. I went to see the solicitor today. I had to ask Jones to let me out, but he was quite amiable. He still hopes to get the house. I got a terrible shock. Mother had an annuity which died with her. Instead of having more money to keep up the house, I'm going to have less. In fact, I don't see how I'm going to be able to live. I wonder if Jones knew about the annuity. He may have found something among Father's papers in the office. That would explain why he was so willing to let me out to see the solicitor. He didn't say anything when I got back, but just as I was going home, I ran into him in the passage. He said in a sort of casual way, "If you're looking for a buyer for that house of your mother's, I might be able to help you. I think I know someone who might be interested." I think I know the someone too, but he still won't get the house if I can do anything about it. This evening, I started making arrangements for bringing the rats into the house. There are quite a number of problems I have to consider. The rats are not prisoners, and I don't intend them to be. If they were prisoners, I would have to provide all their food. I couldn't pay for enough food to feed them for more than a day or two, and if I started stealing more than the odd vegetable from Major Robinson, I would probably get caught. So they have got to be able to get out to find their own food. All that I can offer is comfortable living accommodation with a few titbits now and then. For the first week or two, I shall feed them fully. I have enough money for that. Then, when they get accustomed to their new quarters, I shall gradually cut down their rations to encourage them to go out and forage for themselves. The cellar is not completely underground. There is a small grating at the side of the house which opens into it just above ground level. The first thing I had to do was to make an opening in this big enough for a rat to get through. The bars in the grating were each about as thick as a pencil and about the width of a pencil apart. I got a heavy iron bar from the tool shed and banged at the grating with it till at last I managed to break one of the bars. Then I thrust the heavy bar through and levered it to and fro till I had what I considered a sufficiently large aperture, that is large enough for a full-grown rat, but too small for a cat. The grating is 8 feet above the floor of the cellar. The next task will be to build some sort of staircase which the rats can run up and down from the floor of the cellar to the grating and back again. Well, I've got it all fixed up. I found a plank in the tool shed. I hammered a long nail in at each side, leaving the heads of the nails sticking out about 1/4 of an inch from the wood. I ran wire round the nails to the unbroken bars of the grating. That supported one end of the plank. The other end is much lower and is supported on the top of an old set of shelves at the opposite side of the cellar. We used to use the shelves for storing apples. I've cut bits out of them so that it will be quite easy for a rat to jump from one shelf to the next, either up or down. I've made a new house for them out of packing cases. It's beside the shelves so that a rat can go straight into it from any of the bottom three shelves without having to come out onto the cellar floor. I am going to heat it in the same way as I did with Socrates' house in the tool shed. I should get it finished tomorrow night and maybe even be able to move them in before bedtime. The move has been put off for the time being. I got everything done last night as planned, but I'd forgotten to lay in supplies of food. I didn't even know how many rats I had to feed, so I tried to count the furry tails. I'm not going to bring in the scaly tails. They can stay outside and look after themselves. I thought there were about 20 furry tails. When I actually started counting, I found the number was more like 30, perhaps even 40. The trouble is, I don't know them all individually, and they never stay still. They're always appearing and disappearing. There are about 16 I'm really trying to train. The others do get trained a bit too, but by accident. On thinking it over, I don't think I should take even all the furry-tailed ones, just the top 20. If I want more later, I can probably get them all right from the shed, but I shouldn't need to. The ones I take will breed fast enough. How much will 20 rats eat? A rat weighs about a pound, so 20 rats should eat about as much as 1/10 of a human being. In fact, I know they eat much more, but how much? I have really no idea. Today during my lunch hour, I went into a shop that calls itself a corn and feed store. I ordered a bag of wheat. "What's it for?" the man asked. This seemed to me an impertinence. Impertinence. Impertinence? I don't see that matters, I answered rather stiffly. It matters to the price, he said. If it's for seed or feeding, and if it's for seed, what variety, and whether you want it dressed or not, and how. It's for feeding, I told him. You keep fowl? I didn't answer this. I feel he must have been trying to make fun of me with his talk about dressing. Apparently no further information was necessary, for the fellow weighed up a bag of what I presume is wheat and demanded 30 shillings. It seemed to me a lot, but I wasn't in a position to argue and immediately gave him the money. "Shall I put it in the car for you?" he inquired. "No, I want it delivered," and I was proceeding to give him the address when he interrupted to say, "We don't deliver. Maybe you'd have the car in tomorrow." Of course, I had to admit that I have no car. It then turned out that he was able to arrange delivery perfectly well through some delivery service, but for that he wanted another 5 shillings. "If you please." Of course, I had to give it to him. I had no choice in the matter. It's dreadful how you can find yourself at the mercy of these people. I'm sure the questions about the car were just intended to humiliate me in the first place. He knew very well I hadn't a car, and he recognized that I was the sort of person who normally would have been expected to have one. If you don't have a car these days, you are a sort of second-class citizen. This is very unpleasant, particularly if one has been brought up to regard oneself as rather superior, certainly very much superior to persons such as Jones. I did what turns out to have been a rather clever thing some time ago. The local council delivered to our house a brand new bin, all silvery and shiny. Obviously, they intended to take away the old one, which was undoubtedly worn out. The next time their refuselry was at the house, but I didn't like to think of this magnificent new bin being filled with garbage. So I quietly rescued it and hid it in the attic. The dustmen continued to use the old bin, but in another 6 months or so, another new bin arrived. This time, I didn't dare to save it. The next day, the refuse men carted away the old bin, and I was forced to use the newest bin of all. I did so with a feeling almost as if I was committing some sort of violation. But of course, I wasn't going to give up the bin I had rescued previously to wet tea leaves, cinders, and cabbage stalks. When I got home last night, I found the bag of wheat on the doorstep. I immediately thought of the bin in the attic. I brought it down to the cellar and emptied the bag of wheat into it. Then I had another brilliant idea. I got an old screwdriver and, using it as a cold chisel, cut out 5 holes around the bottom of the bin, just above the bottom rim. A little wheat flowed out through each of these holes onto the floor, but not very much. When you pick up what has flowed out, more flows out to take its place. 2 or 3 rats will easily be able to feed at each hole at any one time. I have thus devised a feed hopper for my rats which will keep their food in constant supply, so long as I keep the bin full, and at the same time keep it clean. Their water supply I had already arranged with drinking bowls which they can fill themselves. I used a ball cock from which I removed the ball. In its place I put a small platform counterbalanced by a spring. When a rat jumps on to the platform will sink, and with it, of course, the lever of the ball cock. The tap will open and the water flow into a little drinking trough below. The water supply arrangement is not quite satisfactory because rats do not always get off the platform immediately. There is sufficient water in the trough and it then flows over the floor. As well, some of the young rats are playful and like to jump on to the platform when an older rat is drinking, with the result that the water pours down onto the drinker's head. Socrates got caught this way last week and was very cross about it. I thought he would have killed the young one at first, but he just rolled him over and gave him a few admonitory nips. The young one did not attempt to fight back, all of which shows that rats are very like human beings, even in their sense of humor. The rats have been in the cellar a fortnight now, and the main snag is just the reverse of what I expected. I thought I would have difficulty in keeping the rats in the cellar. I can't get them to leave it. Why should they? It is warm and comfortable, and there is food and water in abundance. Last night, I thought I would make them leave it. I blocked all the holes in the feed bin with bits of rolled up newspaper and laid a thin trail of wheat up the shelves and along the plank to the grating. I thought this would make them run up the plank and out through the grating. Not a bit of it. When I came back tonight, I found they had pulled the newspaper stoppers out of the bin and were feeding as usual. They hadn't bothered about the wheat on the plank or shelves. This won't do. I can't go on feeding them forever. They'll have to go out and forage for themselves. I must think of something. And I'm going to stop right there. Wow, look at this. Still a lot to get through. All the way up to 169, that's the last page. Wow! Yeah, it's going to take more parts. But anyway, to be continued.